The scholar who owned his library. On identification with the adapted function. A scholar in a quiet provincial town built a library beside his house. The library grew. Each year he added a room. The first room held only the books of his trade, of which there were perhaps 200. The second room held the books he had been told he should read, but had not yet, the works he had bought at auction, the works his older colleagues recommended, the works he had cited without reading, and had then felt obliged to acquire so that he might one day defend the citation. The third room held the books he had read so often the spines had cracked. The fourth held the books that had won prizes. The fifth held the books that had been suppressed. The sixth held the books in languages he could not read, but which he intended, in his retirement, to learn. By the 10th room, he was buying books faster than he could read them. By the 20th, he was building rooms onto rooms. The original house was lost in the middle of the structure, like a small dry seed inside a great fruit. He had to walk through 6 rooms to reach his own kitchen. He had to walk through 8 to reach his own bedroom. The corridors between the rooms had grown so narrow, in places, that he could no longer pass with a coat on. His wife had stopped, in the 2nd decade, asking him to dine. She had cooked his meals in the 1st decade and brought them to him in the 3rd or 4th or 5th room, depending on where she had found him reading. She had stopped because he had stopped noticing. She had begun, in the 2nd decade, to eat alone in the kitchen. He did not, when he discovered this, particularly object. He had been engrossed. He had assumed she was content with the arrangement. He had not asked. He slept among the spines. He ate when he ate among them. He spoke to his wife through them. She would call him from the kitchen, and he would answer from 3 rooms away without looking up. His answers were increasingly sounds rather than words. A grunt that meant yes. A grunt that meant not now. A grunt that meant vaguely, I have heard you. She had learned to read his grunts. She had also, in time, stopped requiring answers. One evening, in his 53rd year, his wife called him by his first name. He did not recognize it. He stood very still in the middle of the 23rd room, turning a page he had not been reading. He could not remember the name his wife had used. He could not remember whether she had used it just now or whether he had imagined the sound of it. He had not heard his first name spoken aloud in some years. The colleagues called him by his surname. The students called him master. The wife had, in the 1st decade, called him by his first name, but in the 2nd decade she had begun to call him only you, and in the 3rd decade she had stopped calling him anything at all. The first name she had used was, he realized, the name of the boy he had been before the first room had been built. He could not recall what that boy had liked. He could not recall what that boy had wanted. He could not recall whether that boy had wished to spend his life reading. The boy was, in some sense, the scholar's earliest acquisition, but the scholar had not opened the boy in many decades, and the boy, like many books on the higher shelves, had become unfindable. He went, after a long while, to the kitchen. He had to walk through 8 rooms to reach it. He passed the books he had read in his 30s, the books he had read in his 40s, the books he had purchased but never opened, the books in languages he had never learned, the books written by men who had become his rivals, the books written by men who had become his friends, the books written by men who had then died. He arrived in the kitchen. His wife was no longer there. The kitchen was dark. The stove had been cold for some time. He touched the iron. It was cold not in the way a stove is cold between meals, but in the way a stove is cold when it has not been lit in days. There was no food on the counters. There was no kettle on the hob. The kitchen had the quality of a room that had been recently abandoned. He sat down at the small kitchen table. The library spoke to him from behind, from every room at once. "You are the library now," it said. "There is no man in the kitchen. The man went to the kitchen many years ago and you did not go with him. You stayed with us. We are in some sense what he became. We are also in some sense what he refused to become. He had wanted in his youth to be a man who could sit at a kitchen table with a wife. He had also wanted to be a man who knew all the books. He could not be both. He chose us. We do not blame him. We have been good to him, but he is not any longer a man with a kitchen. He is a library with a kitchen attached. The kitchen has been abandoned because there was no one to use it. The wife has gone to her sister S. She has been gone for 3 weeks. You did not notice. The scholar wept. He had not wept since he had been the boy his wife had called by the first name. He sat in the kitchen until very late. He did not read. He had nothing in the kitchen to read. He sat at the small table in the dark with the cold stove behind him, and he tried to remember the boy. The boy did not fully come back. The boy was on a high shelf, and he could not in his 53rd year climb that high. His wife returned eventually from her sister S. She had not gone permanently. She had only needed, she said, 3 weeks of quiet. He did not, after her return, ask her where she had been. He sat with her in the kitchen, sometimes in the evenings. He read less. He could not read no books. He was, by then, too much a library to do that, but he learned, slowly, to sit in the kitchen for an hour each evening, and to call his wife by the name she had once called him, and to allow her to call him by the first name he had not heard in 20 years. The library was patient with this. The library understood in its great patience that even a library is, in the end, made of paper, and that paper, in cold rooms, in the absence of a hand to turn it, eventually becomes dust. The scholar lived another 15 years. He died in the kitchen, at the small table, with his wife beside him, holding his hand. The library, when it was emptied by his children, contained some 12,000 books. They were sold at auction. They went to other libraries in other towns, where other scholars added them to their own collections and built rooms onto rooms, and forgot, over decades, the names of their own boys. The scholar who becomes the library has no kitchen and no name. He is read by what he thought he was reading. The library does not, in the end, blame him. The library is patient, but paper in cold rooms becomes dust. The work in the late evening is to walk back through the rooms to the kitchen, while the kitchen is still warm enough to hold you.